I am going to just briefly introduce Joanna, who's joining us in studio today. She's one of the UK's most prominent digital businesswomen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. and a key player in shaping the tech landscape over the last 3 decades. She has held significant leadership positions at major tech companies like Facebook, Google, Bebo. She's also played a pivotal role in Facebook's global expansion as VP and Managing Director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Correct.
Big job. Beyond the tech world, Joanna has been a powerful advocate for responsible innovation, serving as the First Minister for Internet Safety and Security in the UK and as the life peer in the House of Lords. As someone that's been involved in the industry for decades, in the digital industry for decades, we know the digital industry, well, I think of the digital industry as like relatively new. You have a different experience. So can you chat to us about how you got into the space and...
Yeah, back in 1985, I was a grad student in Washington, D.C., and I needed to make money to pay my way through school. So I got a job in a startup company called National Digital. It's in the name, digital. And what we were doing, we were the first company that was digitizing images from a war zone that were like hard copy images, sending them over phone lines for the first time for printing in the national newspapers. When I finished my master's degree, I packed up my Oldsmobile, my little car, and drove all the way across the US. And I'd met an Israeli entrepreneur who started a company in Silicon Valley. And I met him at a conference and he said, well, when you finish your degree, contact me and I'll get you a job. So I showed up in Silicon Valley thinking I had a job. And of course, I knocked on the door, I couldn't even get in.
Oh.
But I found in the newspaper an ad for a job at that company. So I applied. And about 3 weeks later, I got the job. So it was my first product management job of a chip company making, what were called ASICs, chips that were application specific in those days around graphic workstations and things. So early, Silicon graphics type workstations. So I worked there for 10 years in that company. And I became VP of production systems. So I was running a manufacturing operation globally. I worked my way up 10 years, fought hard. But I was really grateful for that decade because I built products that had to scale and that we had to ship internationally and had to be robust enough that they were going to run systems that, had to run, very reliably in telecoms and various other places. So it was a really great baptism of fire into how, systems had to operate and how you had to build technology for scale. So that was a really interesting thing. And then the dot-com crash, the dot-com era started. So I jumped out and took my first CEO job. I was, I was like 32 years old. I got a CEO job running a company, 35, I guess it was, running a company called Vion, which were the first people to put interactive links within video streams. We were doing compression, decompression algorithms for audio and video online. And then we sold that company to Philips. And the other company that was about to buy us was a company called Real Networks, which, remember in the old days, there was a real player on your computer. So this was the first company that gave the internet a voice and video. And they didn't buy the company I was running, but they bought me. So they gave me a job here to run international outside of London. So that's how I found my way. I left Silicon Valley after 15 years and came here to run Real Networks International. And then from Network Appliance, I went to Google. And then the rest of the history is much more known.
Like Facebook?
Yeah, well, Google, I was in Google for 3 years. And then I took a job in another CEO role at Bebo, which was one of the original social networks.
Yes.
We were competing with Facebook and Friendster and MySpace at the time. And I ran that company and sold it to Time Warner.
For $850 million.
Yep, for $850 million. But what we did there that was different is these were the days when Facebook was competing with MySpace and us. And so we all had about 50 million users. So I was like, how can we build our product so that it's different from and differentiate our offering from everyone else? And we were doing media. So we were the first company that was doing kind of Netflix style series online.
Okay.
So we started, we created a program called Cape Modern, which was the first BAFTA nominated original content series. We didn't win the BAFTA, but we were nominated. Anyway, the reason Time Warner bought it is we had, 7 or 8 of these, kind of Netflix style series. And so they bought it because we were calling ourselves a social media network. Because before that, it was just social networks.
Okay.
So we coined the phrase social media. And we were the first company to do like online streaming of content.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you were the architect. Well, I've read that you were the architect behind that major 100 million, hundreds of
850 million.
850, well, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So you're the architect behind that deal, and you are known as like an expert deal maker.
Yeah, I've sold a few companies. I've sold 3 companies I was running, and then I've gone public in 4 other companies that I was involved in. So,
but then didn't Bebo end up like, once you'd sold it or something, it didn't end up actually, it like crashed in a way? What stopped it becoming the next?
I'll tell you what happened is in the early stages of a new market, like it's really hard to determine what your business model is going to look like. So there was now in Netflix, we all pay a subscription fee. In those days, everyone said it had to be ad funded. So we were trying to ad fund a subscription model. Now the subscription model has proven to be the right model, but we were doing the ad funded model. And then what Time Warner bought it, but when they divested it to AOL, when they divested Time Warner and AOL split, AOL became an advertising driven company. So they wanted to do advertising versus subscription. And you can't really sell content that way.
Yeah. So
it went back to a more traditional website style approach. And they let I had Bebo, I had AIM and ICQ were my products as well. But they decided to move away from the communications products and to focus more exclusively on the ad-supported properties. So things like they bought Huffington Post and a number of other things. So what I did is I said, well, I'm going to go work at Facebook then. So I went and ran Facebook.
And then helped the global expansion of that. How did that inform your leadership style? Because you sort of managing one of the biggest companies in the world across different continents must have taught you an awful lot.
Well, it's funny because I think what I've learned over the years is if you're intuitive and if you understand technology and you understand where markets are going and you're intuitive and you're reading the signs, you see things before they occur. You can see around the corners. So many times I was trying to explain to investors or to the rest of the leadership teams like, hey, this thing's going to go this way. And I'm proven right, but not for a while. Do you know what I mean? Like I was right about
the proof's in the pudding, and the pudding has to.
I was right about the Netflix model, but we didn't get to do it. Netflix did. Do you know what I mean? I mean, because when I was doing it, Netflix was still sending CD-ROMs in the mail.
Yeah.
Like that was it. So anyway, to make a long story short, I went to Facebook and then I built the. Social networking was really taking off at that stage. So I was part of the leadership team when we went public, and I was building the international, scaling up the international operation and opening all the offices and hiring all the people. And it was really exciting. But Facebook, we got to where we went public and the ad system was not growing at the stage that the investors wanted it to grow. So the share price was really under pressure. So what we did is we came up with a brand new model for, ad sponsored model that was focused on attention. So and all the data that we had. So we took all the data that people were sharing and we said, let's create a system, an ad system that will recommend content that people are really likely to engage with and to interact with and to incite them to buy. Ooh. So the whole idea behind the algorithm that we developed was that each person would get their own experience, and that experience would be tailored to you. And therefore, because it was tailored to your interests, you're more likely to engage and react. And that was like gold dust for the advertisers.
So was that because like now that's so widespread across so many different platforms. Like
Exactly.
it's AI and algorithms are everywhere. And, you know, if you watch one baked potato video, you're getting a million baked potato videos.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never had one personally. But was Facebook one of the first companies that actually created that sort of algorithm, and then everyone else
everyone's followed
it
now, but Facebook really pioneered it, and it was genius, you guys, because they had all the data already for years. Like it was, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years at that stage the company had been going. They had all this data about all their users, and we had over 1 billion users at the time.
Wow. What year is this?
This would have been 2010, 11 time. Okay. 11, I think 11. And so you have all that information, and you have this opportunity to create something that's really relevant. So we created this highly sophisticated recommendation system that was going to push content to you that you were likely to interact with, also the ads along with that. So it was this system that was tailored for you, and it worked really well, which is why the advertising system just took off. But we didn't understand at the time the unintended consequences. We didn't realize that what is amplified by the algorithm is what is extreme in many cases, what is provocative, what is, you know, gets your emotions going.
Yeah.
And now today, when you think about where we are in society and how polarized we are, and how people are reacting to politics and various other things, and they react online to a post that's maybe not even true, because you've been programmed over time to think and to believe a certain way. So I saw something that Jack Dorsey had recorded at the Oslo Freedom Forum a couple months ago. And he talked about how the recommendation algorithms have taken away our human agency.
Oh, God.
And human agency is really important. You know, it's our free will. It's how we know, like, what we really want and what we really think. But we're being programmed by the algorithm, and it's really it's showing itself in the way society has been polarized. So one of the things I've been working on for the last decade is AI and disinformation. So I left Facebook kind of slightly disillusioned, and I went to work for government. Now, that was something I always wanted to do. When David Cameron was elected, I convinced Mark Zuckerberg to fly over and go to see him. And the first thing he said to me was, there's a real problem with your platform, your product, because kids are being groomed for sexual exploitation on the platform. And he said, you guys need to fix that. And I took it on as the executive in charge of the region. So I took on a project, and I started working with the UK National Crime Agency. And I really started delving into the issues and what was happening. Now, I knew and was familiar with this because as the CEO of Bebo, we also were a social network aimed at younger people. So we were quite attuned to being careful about kids being groomed online for sexual purposes. And we were a very forward-leaning organization at Bebo. But Facebook took the approach of much more laissez-faire and laid-back approach to child safety online.
Yeah.
So it became my issue. And then the prime minister would call me, literally me, and say, what is going on with your company? So I started working with the UK National Crime Agency and learning about, you know, what we could do as a platform to make it more safe for kids. And to be honest, I got a bit frustrated that the company wasn't making the right moves. And one day in a strange moment, I got a phone call from Number 10, and they asked me if I would come in and run the digital economy unit at Number 10. And I said, okay. So I didn't really think it through, but
well, the first minister for internet safety and security, that's a major role, because you don't have a blueprint either. You're not looking at someone that's done that beforehand. You really are navigating uncharted territory and around really, really sensitive topics.
Well, and the thing is, the UK government at the time was very forward-leaning on these issues, and created a position first in the world of a minister for internet safety and security. So, you know, cybersecurity was starting to be a big thing. You know, on safety online was going to be, was becoming a really big issue, you know, and so I feel like it was a privileged position, but it was difficult because there was no counterpart in any other government. So like when I would go to the US, I would have to work with someone from the Justice Department. somebody from the Homeland Security. If it was an investigation, it would be someone from, the White House and policy. But I had everything in one sort of team. So it was quite interesting. And I do think the model was very smart. And I went on to stay for, 5.5 years in government, serving under 2 prime ministers. And one of the biggest challenges, the other thing I work on quite extensively for the last decade is disinformation and online radicalization. And I became the minister in charge of trying to understand why young people in the UK were being recruited for radicalization to travel to Syria and fight for the Islamic State.
Yeah.
So that was a really big issue at the time. And so we were trying to, as a government, understand how on social media a kid could go from not knowing anything about the Islamic State to traveling like a week later with the belongings they had and traveling to Syria to become a ISIS bride. It was crazy. So we started looking at how do we analyze all the public posts to understand where these threats are coming from, what is the language of extremism, how are they recruiting kids, and why are kids falling into this? So we had a team of engineers and external people, run by GCHQ, and we built the first AI systems that analyzed the language of extremism. And we built what were called at the time, it's quite primitive now, but classifiers. So we built classifiers that understood 8 different types of extremism online.
Wow.
And we were using those to understand, far-right extremism, Islamist extremism, and trying to create policies and plans to address that and how it was radicalizing people inside the UK.
Wow.
And then we would share that with our partners in other governments. And what I learned in that process was that the power of a large language model and how you could, now, years later, we have ChatGPT and everyone's using them regularly. But at the time, it was very complicated to actually, because the compute took a lot of compute to ingest all the world's public posts and to analyze it for these various types of extremism. So it was a huge technology project that we undertook. And, but it got me into AI and learning and understanding, the language, how language could be used and narratives could be developed to actually recruit and radicalize people for extremism.
Yeah, that's really, really important work and quite forward thinking.
Yeah, it was at the time.
Very,
and we did offer our technology to the companies, but they weren't interested.
Well, that brings me onto my next question.
We said you can have it for free.
Yeah, because
it's all yours.
Well, I think back in 2013, it maybe wasn't like glaring them in the face as much. It maybe was easier to ignore.
2016 by now, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah.
But I think now it's not even that long ago. It's crazy. It was only 5. Bad math. I'm not going to do that. But what I wanted to know is what
8
role.
years.
8. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. So given the work that you did in internet safety, what role do you think big tech companies need to play today in addressing that? What aren't they doing? What are they doing terribly? What are they doing right?
Well, I feel like it's really interesting because big tech, as I described, the reason I went through that whole process of describing how the algorithm works is because in terms of keeping people safe online, understanding how that works is absolutely vital to solving the problems. Many harms and crimes are result in people being manipulated to do something, to act. So you have a lot of young people who are cutting themselves. They're pushed into self-harm groups, and they're shamed if they don't harm themselves enough. Like, you're not tough enough, you're not strong enough. And there have been a lot of cases where young people have committed suicide or gone too far. There's a lot of cases where young people have been manipulated into starving themselves because of body issues and various other things, and groups that come together that do those types of things. One of the biggest problems in the UK right now and around the world is sextortion, where criminal gangs of people are using, grooming kids online for sexual purposes. They're pretending to be someone their age, and they're making friends with them, and they're reaching them, and over time they're gaining their trust. So you think I'm a young boy, and I think you're a young girl, or I know who you are because I'm recruiting you. And then you basically upload a photo of yourself, and then I extort you for money. And this happens. There's been so many cases around the world. I dare to say even the numbers, but kids committing suicide because they're afraid to tell their parents that they've run into this. They've shared a sexually explicit image of themselves. Those people will actually blast it out to the friend group and share it with everybody online and humiliate them. And then we've got the situation where AI is generating, there's nudify sites now where kids are being nudified, where it takes a picture of you and
it's not even them.
Your body shape, and it sort of says, well, this is what you probably look like naked, but then they share it with everybody. It looks so authentic. It makes people think it's real. So you're back to your question is, what is the role of technology companies? We've got a really difficult situation right now because you've got a business model that relies on these algorithms, and there is no incentive for companies to stop using them. And you've got young people being harmed, or people of all ages, to be fair, being harmed. And whether it's scams, criminals, coming and scamming money from people, or manipulating them into giving money because of these stories they tell, or whether it's sextortion, or people being groomed for trafficking and various other things. There's no incentive on the company's part to solve this problem because that incentive is so lucrative. And by the way, all the big platforms are now moving into AI, and they need the sustaining business model to feed their investments in AI because, building the next AI models and systems is very expensive. So you need the huge amounts of compute.
But that's not good.
So we've got a very difficult situation where it's a misalignment of incentives, where the business model is the problem. Like in politics, they always say, in elections, it's the economy, stupid, was the phraseology people say. Like, if you're running a campaign, you always have to focus on the economy because that's what makes people vote, because it affects them deeply. In the case of social media, it's the business model. The business model is glaringly obvious that the business model not only controls many ways controls our actions, manipulates what we see and view, encourages us to amplify extremes and to react in negative and really difficult ways that are polarizing society, but there's no incentive to fix it.
But surely it's the responsibility of the technology companies to develop technologies that prioritize safety, privacy, employee ethics. Surely that's a no-brainer.
Well, if you listen to the public statements of all the major platform companies, they talk about the amount of people they have in trust and safety. They talk about the amount of money they're spending in trust and safety. And governments are frantically trying to legislate to combat these emerging and prolific harms and crimes against citizens. But it's really difficult for governments to keep up and to understand what to do. And whenever governments try to react, it's like, oh, you're asking companies to be censors, to surveil our information, and to intervene. And so the reality is that it's a catch-22, because if you're a believer in free speech and privacy, this kind of regulation where you're asking a company to monitor and to mediate those decisions, you're creating an impossible situation if you believe in free speech. So it's a really difficult thing. But the reality is it comes back to the business model. And there's no incentive to fix it because it's so incredibly lucrative. Sorry.
It's okay. It's not your fault.
It is what it is.
It's crazy. So that leads on to my next question, which you are a member of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity.
Yes.
Which is an initiative by leading figures in politics and tech to address the question of foreign interference in elections. So what are your top concerns regarding the US elections right now in terms of in that space? And how are you going to combat them? And
well, one of the things I'm working on right now is a political documentary that will hopefully, if everything comes together, we'll finish by the end of January. So we started last year with the Slovakian election, where an AI deep fake actually influenced the outcome of the election. And we started following this year in 2024. For whatever reason, there were more elections on the cards this year than in any other time in history. Over 50% of the world's population are voting in elections. So it's been a really pivotal year. And in almost every election, we've seen AI deepfakes have a major impact. And if you look at the US election right now, it's incredible. Every day, like, try to create a documentary around AI and disinformation when you've got, people who own the platforms actually spreading the disinformation.
Oh no.
You know who I'm talking about on a regular basis. So, putting their weight behind a particular candidate and then working on behalf of that candidate. It's pretty crazy right now. So the big thing people talk about right now is AI is immensely powerful into creating fakery, like convincing us that we see something. You believe what you see and you believe what you hear.
Completely.
And now you actually have what looks like a real person in that same person's voice telling you something that they've never said. And it's hard to decipher. Even I've been tricked by things that I've shared with people that turned out to be fake. And so we have to elevate our awareness and understanding for what's fake. So there's a lot of conversation right now about what AI companies can do to create guardrails. Like, for instance, all the major foundational models, the main ones, are put guardrails in place that stop you from, creating an AI deepfake of the current prime minister, for instance, because that's really serious. So it will stop you from doing that. But all the open source models have no such guardrails.
Yeah.
So there are certain products you can use that enable you to do it, and other products that are much more responsible. So unlike the social media platforms, you've got AI companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, who are leaning in and saying, we're not going to let our models do these things. And they work with governments and they're being proactive. But here's the problem. There's open source models who don't do that. And, X and Meta both are open source. So there's a problem right there. You've got Midjourney, you've got all these other products that people use. And then you've got the situation where once a deep fake is created, the distribution platforms amplify it because it's extreme and it's interesting and it's shared. And so if the distribution network, back to the business model, is not playing ball and not being responsible, then somebody's always going to beat the deep fake is going to beat the system. And an AI is going to get created that is a fakery that then gets propagated to millions. Yeah. So we got a real problem.
It's almost propaganda, brainwashing to a certain extent, of even not necessarily deep fakes, like taking certain clips from certain speeches and, being on an anti Trump algorithm or pro-Trump algorithm, and then everything's, the opposite of that. There's absolutely no in between. There's no integrity to journalism. Anyway.
Well, the other big problem with the business model, again, is that truth or fact-based fact-check journalism is behind a paywall in all instances now. So in order to pay for the newsroom, you need to pay a subscription. So the ad model is so powerful that all the ad dollars have gone to the social networks that use that model. So journalism is really stuck. So high quality fact-check journalism costs money.
Yeah.
So you almost like the truth has become a luxury good. So there's a gap. There's a truth luxury
Truth
gap.
has become a luxury good.
Think about it for a second. Like,
That
if you don't have a lot of money and there's inflation right now and people are struggling financially, you're not going to pay, $10 a month or, $20 a month for something.
No.
You can't.
No.
Like, and so what happens is people just don't pay for anything. So they're only getting their news through social media.
An algorithm on a reel or. So
Harvard just did a study they published a couple weeks ago where young people between the ages of 18 and 34, 75% of them get their news from either TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And then only 25% of them get news from other sources.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So nobody pays for news. So all this high quality journalism that's fact checked is behind a paywall and not being read.
Yeah.
And all we're getting is this algorithmically amplified garbage. And this is where we are.
No one really has control over. No one has control over.
And again, there's no incentive to control it because it's a money-making machine.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Well, that's awfully harrowing.
Sorry.
It's okay.
But the thing is, the world doesn't understand this. So governments, right? They're trying to legislate and they're just running up against a buzzsaw, right? They're like, well, we're going to do this. And then the privacy advocates come out and say, well, we don't want that because you're affecting our privacy. But then governments are like, well, what are we supposed to do? And, the companies are having a laugh because they're just like, oh,
they're just making money.
Hand over fist. Yeah. And there's no incentive to change it. So it's a dire situation, really.
I could honestly sit here and actually, I don't know if I could sit here and talk to you for ages because I wouldn't sleep tonight, but I also could.
We didn't talk about We Protect, though.
Oh, yes.
We have to talk about the We Protect Global Alliance.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've done to sort of combat this issue around the fact that, these are transnational issues involving companies that are have more revenue than the GDP of most countries. Okay. So this is the issue. So they're as powerful as countries, but they have no, they're not responsible or accountable to citizens. Yeah, exactly. So what have I done? So 10 years ago in December, I started an organization called the We Protect Global Alliance. And I said, let's at least unite the world around a non-controversial issue, which is let's stop online child sexual exploitation.
Everyone can agree.
Can we at least agree on that?
Wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
So we started this organization and we now have 103 governments all working in partnership to combat online child sexual abuse and exploitation. And I'm really proud of the fact that over 10 years, we have done a lot of great work. We've broken massive pedophile rings and trafficking rings around the world. We've got law enforcement working together. We have a model national response for new countries that sign up, and we help them get up to speed, and we share intelligence and information. We work with civil society. We work with victims groups. We try to do our absolute best. But 10 years on, I feel so sick. You asked me what keeps me up at night. I feel like we're not doing enough. And it really comes down to the fact that the platforms do not play ball, period, end of. They publish all this information that they're trying to do this and that and the other thing. And
with no responsibility, no blood on their hands.
And there's no accountability because there's no transnational laws that hold them to account.
So surely that needs to be changed, like global cooperation, global laws.
Well, the Digital Services Act in Europe is starting to have teeth, which is good. The Online Safety Act here is starting to have a bit of teeth, but it's slow.
You're doing such amazing work.
I'm trying.
And I really wish that these people had even an ounce of the passion and sort of empathy and that you do with this, because we need people like you that are going to change the space, that are pioneering. And you have been for the last 3 decades. It's crazy. Anyway, as I said, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but we are on a bit of a time limit. So I've got a question from Ben. I'll be interested to know, in a brief summary, as it's clearly a big topic, whether you, in your capacity as co-chair of the GPAI steering committee, considers the development of AI regulation to be matching the pace of the AI revolution.
Yeah, so I served 2 terms as the co-chair of the Global Partnership on AI, and that was an organization set up by President Macron and Prime Minister Trudeau when they had their G7 presidencies. And the way it's set up is operates out of the OECD in Paris. So again, it's a multi-stakeholder organization. When I left, we had 25 governments. I think they're up to 37, 38 now. So again, it's pulling governments together, pulling academics together, researchers, and identifying, number one, what are the big challenges and the problems on the horizon, and what are the responses to that. And so in the charter of the GPAY, you can only serve 2 terms consecutively. So I'm not there now. I had to cycle out. But I would say that there is an international sort of awareness and mechanism of like-minded countries working on this. And I think in many respects, and on AI, the EU AI Act was revolutionary. I mean, it was first in the world. And I think in many respects, we're ahead on that. And as I said earlier, the AI companies, the main foundational model companies, are being much more responsible and responsive to the challenges and issues. And I'm going to talk about existential risk in a second, because that's a different category. But in terms of the use and deployment of AI today, I think we have a very good consensus about what should be done ethically, legally, and the laws are catching up, but there is a real sort of responsible nature to this. And I'll tell you why. Because AI products are products that people use, and they governments can hold them to account, whereas social media platforms are protected by something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which means that they are considered a dumb pipe. They're considered a pass-through mechanism, and they can't be held accountable for what is hosted on their platforms. So this is the nuance. So the legalities around the internet were, in order for broadband to take off, we had to create a system whereas the broadband provider wouldn't be responsible for what someone was sending over that line, over that wire. And that's why it was set up that way. So social media benefited from that, but we've never been able, the US has never changed the law to make it, to get rid of Section 230 and to make them responsible for policing their own networks. So this is why they've been able to get away with it, and why AI companies cannot, because they are held to account by law for their products and what they do and what people do with their products. So if it's illegal to create child sexual abuse material using AI, which is becoming, this law is coming to fruition everywhere, hopefully soon. If that is the case, and if an AI company's model does that, they're responsible. Whereas now, if somebody distributes that on a social network, the social network is immune from prosecution, because that law has never changed since 1996. So the problem is,
how much has changed since 1996?
Yeah, exactly. So this is the problem.
Yeah,
and
it's behind.
The tech platforms are really, it's the distribution channel that is the problem at the moment. Because you can create AI that is, even if it's illegal, if it doesn't leave your computer, it's not dangerous, right? But if that AI leaves your computer and then is distributed to tens and hundreds of millions of people, it becomes a weapon.
It's different, yeah.
It becomes a weapon. It could be a weapon of war. It could be a weapon of disinformation. It could be a deep fake that's going to start a war. I mean,
literally.
But
it can.
But the algorithm will propagate it no matter what, because it's provocative and it's interesting. And that social media company is immune from prosecution. And we're trying to change that. The Online Safety Act is changing that. The Digital Services Act is trying to change that, but it's taking a lot of time.
Especially with nuclear wars and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like with the president of the US being the only person in charge of pressing that button, and he can literally blow up the whole world.
But in this era, what if somebody makes a deep fake that says that's happening?
And then, I think that I listened to a podcast, Diary of a CEO, where this nuclear expert did say that they were literally minutes or seconds away from the president pressing the button, but then realized that it was misinformation.
Oh God. Yeah.
And it's scary.
It is scary. Now, on existential risk, which is the other side of this, like, you know, autonomous weapons, you know, things where systems like AI systems will become sentient and actually be able to make decisions that humans can't control. This is a real issue. It's a little bit down the line, but it is something we should think about. And that's what a lot of the AI safety institutes are focused on. They're focused on existential risk. They're not focused on the here and now. That's what we need the laws to do, the here and now.
Existential risk as in,
you know, an AI system that could learn to not stop killing people, things like that. Like
sort of become more powerful than
more powerful than we
sort of a horror movie.
And you can't control it. Yeah.
What are the odds of that actually even happening?
Oh, very real.
Is it quite likely?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why the foundational models have to be submitted for testing now. And the AI companies are, as I said, they're being responsible. Like, you know, there was a deal that was done just this week where I know OpenAI and Anthropic have both said that they will submit all of their models for government inspection. They'll be transparent about how they operate, because nobody wants to be responsible for that. You also asked me what keeps me up at night, and I said politics at the moment keep me up, because we're in a sliding doors moment here.
Yeah.
If certain people win elections, things go one way. If other people win elections, they go a very different way. Yeah.
Especially about how they view AI and the sort of policies that they want to put in place around it to protect people.
And the powerful people behind both sides. So it's a tricky time, guys. Tricky time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great
so much.
Talk to you.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you. You are an actual rock star. You've got so much knowledge. You're brimming with these really, really special and valuable insights.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad that we could share like the tip of the iceberg of that today.
Great. Thanks.
And yeah, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Awesome. Thank you.